The barbershop sits on the same corner where it's been for 40 years, squeezed between a bodega and a check-cashing store that didn't exist when Al Pacino used to get his hair cut here as a young actor. The red, white, and blue pole still spins outside, hypnotic in the late afternoon light. And through the window, he can see 3 barbers working on customers, their movements practiced and unheard. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe, comment, and like it. He's been walking through his old neighborhood for 2 hours, retracing routes he used to take daily when he lived in a studio apartment 6 blocks away and could afford a haircut only every few weeks. The Bronx has changed around the edges, new businesses replacing old ones, different faces on the street, but some things remain constant. The barbershop is one of them. Al Pacino pushes through the door and steps into the familiar smell of hair, tonic, and aftershave, and something else he can't identify, but remembers from 30 years ago. The shop is exactly as he left it. For chairs, mirrors running along one wall, framed photos of neighborhood kids who played high school football, certificates from barber school hanging crooked on the wall, painted a shade of green that was probably fashionable in 1975. 3 men sit in chairs getting haircuts, while 2 others wait on a bench against the window. They're talking about the Yankees' chances this season, about a local councilman who got caught taking bribes, about someone's nephew who just got back from the Marines. The conversation flows easily between them, comfortable and unguarded, the kind of male friendship that develops in places where the same men gather regularly over years. None of them look at him when he enters. One barber glances up, nods toward the waiting bench, returns his attention to the customer whose sideburns he's trimming with surgical precision. Al Pacino sits down, picks up a sports magazine from the small table, and listens to the conversation continue around him as if he's invisible. This is what he came here for, though he didn't realize it until this moment. The chance to sit in a room full of men and simply exist without having to perform, without having to be Al Pacino for anyone's benefit. These men see a middle-aged guy waiting for a haircut, nothing more or less than that simple reality. The barber closest to him is maybe 65, with steady hands and the kind of mustache that went out of style decades ago, but suits his face. He's cutting the hair of a construction worker who's explaining why his son should quit college and learn a trade instead. The barber listens while he works, offering occasional comments that show he's paying attention. College costs too much, the customer says, gesturing with his hands until the barber gently repositions his head. Kid's gonna graduate with $50,000 in debt, then what? Gonna work in an office making the same money he could make with his hands, except he'll be paying loans for 20 years. The second customer, an older man with gray stubble, shakes his head. Education's never a waste. Maybe he won't use the degree exactly like he thinks, but it teaches you how to think, how to solve problems. My daughter went to college. Now she's a nurse. Good steady work helps people. Al Pacino finds himself leaning forward slightly, drawn into the conversation despite having no part in it. These men are discussing real problems with real consequences, weighing practical concerns against abstract benefits, talking about their children's futures with the kind of direct investment that his own conversations about career choices never contain. The construction worker's barber, the one with the mustache, pauses in his cutting. Depends on the kid, he says thoughtfully. Some kids need college to figure out who they are. Others already know, just need the chance to do it. Question is whether you're paying for education or just paying for a piece of paper. The wisdom in his voice surprises Al Pacino. This is a man who's probably never been to college himself, who cuts hair for $40 and lives in the same neighborhood where he grew up, but he's thinking deeply about questions of education and purpose and the different paths young people might take toward meaningful lives. A new customer enters the shop, a man in his 40s wearing a postal worker's uniform. The others greet him by name, ask about his route, make room on the bench. He sits down heavily, complaining about his feet, about the heat, about customers who don't maintain their mailboxes properly. You see that game last night? The postal worker asked the room in general. Bottom of the ninth, 2 outs, and Rodriguez strikes out looking. Didn't even swing at a pitch right down the middle. This triggers a debate about the current state of baseball, about whether players today have the same hunger as previous generations, about money and motivation, and what makes someone a clutch performer under pressure. The conversation is passionate but friendly, the kind of argument that strengthens friendship rather than threatening it. Al Pacino watches the men talk and realizes he can't remember the last time he had this kind of conversation. Not the baseball discussion specifically, but the easy back and forth between people who see each other regularly, who know each other's opinions and families and concerns, but continue to find new things to discuss. His own social interactions have become increasingly professional over the years. Conversations with agents and directors and other actors that focus on work and business and the careful management of careers and reputations. Even his friendships, the few that remain, feel constrained by considerations of privacy and image and the strange protocols that govern relationships between famous people. The barber finishes with the construction worker, who pays and tips and promises to see everyone next week. The mustached barber looks at Al Pacino and nods toward the empty chair. "You're up." Al Pacino settles into the chair and looks at himself in the mirror. The man looking back is older than he expects, more lined around the eyes, grayer than the last time he really studied his own reflection. But more than that, he looks tired in a way that sleep can't fix, worn down by something that has nothing to do with physical exhaustion. "What can I do for you?" the barber asks, running his hands through Al Pacino's hair with professional assessment. His touch is impersonal but not unkind, the practiced evaluation of someone who's been cutting hair for decades. "Just a trim," Al Pacino says. "Clean it up a little." The barber nods and begins working, his movements efficient and sure. Al Pacino closes his eyes and lets himself relax into the familiar ritual, the sound of scissors and quiet conversation, the feeling of someone taking care of him in a simple, uncomplicated way. The conversation continues around him. The postal worker is telling a story about a dog on his route that's learned to bring the mail from the box to the front door. The older customer with gray stubble mentions that his grandson is learning to read, describes the pride on the kid's face when he gets through a whole sentence without help. These are the kinds of stories that fill ordinary life, small triumphs and daily frustrations, and the slow accumulation of experiences that create meaning without requiring an audience. Al Pacino listens and feels something like envy for these men's ability to find significance in simple things, to be proud of their children's achievements without having to consider how that pride might be perceived by strangers. "You live around here?" the barber asks, continuing to cut while he talks. "Used to," Al Pacino says. "Long time ago. Moved away for work." "Yeah? What kind of work?" The question is casual, just barbershop conversation, but it forces Al Pacino to decide how much truth to reveal. He can't say he's an actor without changing everything, without the conversation suddenly becoming about his career rather than just ordinary human interaction. "Entertainment business," he says, the same vague answer he's learned to give in situations like this. "Had to move to the city for better opportunities." The barber nods, understanding the basic economics without needing specifics. People leave the neighborhood for work all the time, chase opportunities that require them to give up the comfort of familiar places and familiar people. It's one of the fundamental tensions of adult life, the choice between staying home and moving toward whatever might improve your circumstances. "You miss it?" the barber asks. "The neighborhood, I mean." The question catches Al Pacino off guard with its directness. Does he miss it? He misses something, certainly, but he's not sure if it's the place itself or the person he was when he lived here, when his life was smaller and more manageable and connected to real community. Sometimes, he admits, it was simpler then. People knew each other, looked out for each other, felt more like home. The barber makes a sympathetic sound. That's changing everywhere, though. People move around more now, don't stay in one place long enough to build real connections. Social media makes everyone think they're connected, but it's not the same as knowing your neighbors. The postal worker joins the conversation. "I see on my route. Used to be everyone knew everyone, at least on their own block. Now, people live next to each other for years without speaking. They're all too busy, too stressed, too worried about their own problems to pay attention to anybody else." Al Pacino recognizes the truth in this observation. His own isolation isn't unique to celebrity. It's part of a broader cultural shift toward individualism and privacy that affects everyone. But fame has accelerated the process for him, made community impossible rather than just unlikely. The older customer with gray stubble looks up from his magazine. "My wife's always trying to get me to talk to the new neighbors. Young couple, moved in last month, seem nice enough, but I don't know what to say to them. We're from different generations, different worlds. What am I going to talk about with some 25-year-old who works with computers? Same things you talk about with anyone." The barber suggests while he continues working on Al Pacino's hair. Weather, sports, what's going on in the neighborhood. People are people. Doesn't matter how old they are or what they do for work. But Al Pacino knows it's more complicated than that. He wants to believe the barber's simple wisdom. Wants to think that human connection can transcend differences in age and background and experience. But his own attempts to connect with people outside his profession have been consistently frustrated by the barrier of recognition, by the way fame changes every interaction, whether he wants it to or not. The barber steps back slightly to examine his work, head tilted, eyes narrowing with professional focus. He makes a few small adjustments, tiny, almost invisible corrections, then continues cutting, scissors moving with steady confidence. His concentration is complete. There is no rush in him, no distraction. He is fully absorbed in the simple task of making Al Pacino look better, of providing a service that has immediate, visible results. There's something deeply satisfying about watching someone work like this. Someone who knows exactly what they're doing, who takes pride in doing it well, not because anyone is watching, not because it will be remembered, but because the work itself deserves care. The barber isn't thinking about legacy or meaning. He's thinking about balance, symmetry, precision, and that feels strangely reassuring. "You got kids?" the postal worker asks, glancing up from his magazine and folding Al Pacino naturally into the conversation. The question is casual, unweighted, the kind of thing people ask when they're filling space, not digging for truth. "No," Al Pacino says. The word lands heavier than he expects. It hangs in the air for just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Not uncomfortable, exactly, but noticeable. The other men sense it immediately. No one follows up. No one asks why. There's an unspoken understanding, a quiet respect for boundaries that doesn't need to be announced. It's never too late. The older customer says after a moment, not pushing, just offering. "My brother didn't have his first kid until he was 52. Now he's got a 10-year-old who keeps him running around like he's 20 again. Best thing that ever happened to him." Al Pacino smiles politely at the story, nods, but doesn't respond. How could he explain that it might already be too late for him, not because of age, but because of everything else? How does he talk about the impossibility of normal family life when your name changes the meaning of every room you enter? When children wouldn't be allowed to grow quietly, when their lives would become something watched, documented, speculated on before they even understood what privacy meant. So he stays quiet. The conversation drifts naturally, without effort, to other topics. Local politics, changes in the neighborhood, the way the block used to feel 20 years ago, before rents went up, before storefronts changed hands so often. The men trade memories casually, not trying to impress one another, just placing their lives next to each other for comparison. Al Pacino listens. And in listening, he feels something rare, the calm that comes from being included without being central, from belonging to a group without having to define himself with. He doesn't have to be interesting. He doesn't have to lead the conversation. He doesn't even have to speak much at all. The barber finishes the main cut and switches to trimming around his ears, hands steady, movements careful. The closeness of it surprises him. When was the last time someone touched him like this, not with reverence or caution, not with awareness of status, but with simple professionalism, with the uncomplicated intent to help? His usual barber comes to his apartment, works quietly, treats him with careful deference. There are no other customers, no shared space, no incidental conversation, just a service wrapped in politeness and distance. Here, the barber leans in without hesitation, brushes hair from his skin, adjusts his head gently with 2 fingers. There's no ceremony in it, no self-consciousness. "How's that look?" the barber asks, holding up the mirror so Al Pacino can see the back of his head. "Perfect," Al Pacino says, and means it. The haircut is exactly what he asked for. Clean, simple, well done. But more than that, the experience itself feels right. Normal, grounded. A small moment of life, functioning the way it's supposed to. The barber removes the cape from around his neck and brushes the loose hair from his shoulders. $40, he says casually. The same price it's probably been for decades. The same price it will likely remain as long as the shop survives. Al Pacino P. He adds a generous tip, but not so generous that it draws attention. Not enough to break the illusion. The barber thanks him sincerely, then turns immediately to the next customer who's already settling into the chair. The world moves on. As Al Pacino stands to leave, the postal worker looks up again. "Good to meet you," he says genuinely. Hope you'll come back next time you're in the neighborhood. Thanks, Al Pacino replies. I will. And for a brief moment, he almost believes it. But as he walks toward the door, he already knows he probably won't come back. Not because the experience wasn't pleasant, it was more than pleasant. It was quietly restorative in a way he hadn't anticipated, but because returning would introduce risk. Risk of recognition. Risk of explanation. Risk of turning something pure into something negotiated. What made the afternoon meaningful was its anonymity, its lack of consequence. To return would be to tamper with that balance, to transform something accidental into something self-conscious and therefore false. Outside the barber shop, Al Pacino walks slowly down the familiar street, one hand unconsciously running through his newly cut hair. The sensation is unfamiliar in its freshness, a small physical reminder of change. Behind him, through the front window, he can see the men continuing their conversation without pause. The chairs are still full. Someone is laughing. Someone else is speaking animatedly, hands moving as he makes a point. The room hasn't noticed his absence. The community inside continues effortlessly, sustained by nothing more than habit and presence. Men arriving, sitting, talking, leaving. A simple rhythm. A ritual repeated week after week, year after year, without ceremony or significance beyond itself. No one inside is special. No one needs to be. This is what he's lost, he realizes. Not the barbershop itself, but the ability to belong somewhere without that belonging becoming a performance. The men inside accepted him instantly and without effort, not because of who he was, but because of where he was. Because he showed up at the right time, sat in the right chair, and needed the same ordinary thing they did. There were no expectations placed on him, no curiosity beyond politeness, no attempt to define him. He was included simply because he was there. But that inclusion rests on ignorance. The moment one of them recognizes him, and maybe one day maybe they'll see his face in a magazine or on a television screen and feel a flicker of recognition, everything will shift. The quiet customer will be retroactively transformed into a story. Their easy inclusion will become a brush with fame. The memory will no longer belong to the moment itself, but to the larger narrative of celebrity intruding into ordinary life. And that change will be irreversible. He continues walking toward the subway, carrying with him the sound of their voices as if they might linger in the air behind him. For 40 minutes, he existed as nothing more or less than a customer getting a haircut. No wait, no backstory, no performance. The simplicity of it felt like a gift, one he doesn't know how to preserve without destroying it. The train carries him back toward Manhattan, toward his apartment, toward the scheduled phone calls and meetings, and the constant, invisible labor of managing a life that has grown too large to inhabit naturally. The city reasserts itself around him, louder, faster, less forgiving. Faces glance at him and look away. Some linger a second too long, but the memory stays. The barber's steady hands. The postal worker's casual friendliness. The older customer's unpolished wisdom about education, family, and the quiet compromises people make to find meaning in their lives. None of it was remarkable, and that was the point. Understanding this, he realizes that what he mourns isn't only his past. It's his inability to have a present, to exist fully in real time, in real places, with real people who see him as fundamentally the same as themselves. The barbershop exists physically in the world he just left behind, but symbolically it represents something else entirely. A state of being he can no longer enter. The simple possibility of being unknown, of being unremarkable, of being allowed to be human without having to mean anything more than that. And as he disappears into the crowd, he understands that this loss isn't dramatic or visible. It doesn't announce itself. It simply accumulates, quietly, in moments like this, moments that feel like home, and then slip away because home is no longer a place he's allowed to stay. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment with your thoughts on the video. I always enjoy reading.